Thank you, Elder MacDonald, for your blessing this morning. Good morning and welcome. On behalf of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corp, thank you, Grand Chief Billy Morin, and for the community of Enoch for welcoming us here this morning. We'd also like to acknowledge that we're gathering on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground and traveling route of the Cree, Saulteaux, Sioux, Blackfoot, Métis, and Dene. I also want to extend a sincere thank you to Premier Kenney, Minister Wilson, Associate Minister Nally, and MLA Long, who are all with us today. We're here today because of the visionary leadership that established the AIOC. The overarching mandate of the AIOC is to bolster Indigenous access to capital and participation in the economy. We do so by way of loan guarantees and capacity grants to support Indigenous investment and ownership in commercially viable mid to large-scale natural resource projects and related infrastructure. Only 11 months ago, the AIOC was created, and today we're pleased to announce that a $93 million loan guarantee has been extended in support of 6 Alberta First Nations as they gain partnership and a material ownership stake in the Cascade Power Project. I want to respectfully acknowledge the Indigenous leaders and the representatives that are present today from the 6 First Nations, specifically Grand Chief Billy Morin of Enoch Cree, Chief Tony Alexis of Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation, Chief Vernon Watchmaker of Kihiwin, Chief Douglas Beaverbones of Ochise First Nation, and Chief Tom Houle of Goodfish Whitefish Lake First Nation. Without your vision, your leadership, and your trust, we would not be gathered here today. Cascade is a 900 megawatt, highly efficient, natural gas-fired power facility being constructed near Edson. This infrastructure asset will provide tangible benefits to the 6 participating First Nations for the next 30 years. The powerful echo effect of Indigenous ownership in natural resource projects include Indigenous skills development, employment, and capacity building. But also very importantly, ownership itself fosters a mindset and a legacy of prosperity and future-mindedness for the youth and adult members of the nations involved. We do not underestimate the power of that shift in thinking and what it will mean for the 6 First Nations. We also know that Indigenous ownership and meaningful participation in the economy will attract greater economic development opportunities for Alberta and drive our broader economy and prosperity for all. Together, we create win-win initiatives. And this is why we are all so proud and pleased to be making this announcement together today. Today marks the beginning of a new era of Indigenous partnerships and economic development that the AIOC is profoundly proud to support. With that, I would like to invite Premier Jason Kenney to make his remarks.
Thank you so much, Alicia, and so great to have you as the new Chief Executive Officer of Alberta's Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. Thank you, Grand Chief Morin, to you and your whole community here at the Enoch First Nation for welcoming us to your facility on your reserve, on your traditional land, and thank you to all of the chiefs and thank you, Elder, for opening us with that lovely prayer and reflection, and thank you to all of the chiefs and elders who are with us. To Chief Alexis, Chief Watchmaker, Chief Houle, to Paul Posent of Backwoods Energy Services, to the Chair of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, Cody Church, and I see Indigenous Services Minister Rick Wilson. It's hard to recognize everybody here behind the masks. We also have Minister for Natural Gas and Electricity, Dale Nally, and MLA Martin Long, and I'm sorry if I'm missing anybody. Thank you all for being here for a real red letter day. This is a great day for Alberta and for Indigenous communities in our province. This is an historic moment, an announcement heralding a major advance of Indigenous investment and partnership in the development of Alberta's natural resource sector. I'm pleased to be back here on the Enoch First Nation. In fact, I was just here last night having dinner with Chief Billy and others. And I was here actually for an announcement earlier in the summer. Our last get-together here was in July for the big announcement about the Government of Alberta's partnership with Ottawa and Alberta First Nations in our billion-dollar site rehabilitation program to clean up thousands of abandoned oil and gas wells and related sites. It's the biggest oil patch rehabilitation project in Canadian history, and it's creating thousands of jobs all over our province, including for Indigenous Albertans by First Nation-owned contractors. Those jobs are helping to bring down the province's unemployment rate from over 15% earlier this year when we were hammered by the pandemic-driven global economic shutdown and the resulting crash in oil prices. The August job numbers that came in last week pegged Alberta's current unemployment rate at 11.8%. It's still way too high, but it is progress, and it remains one of the highest rates of joblessness in the country. Still, the bold, ambitious recovery plan that we launched in June to create jobs immediately and build, diversify, and set Alberta's economy on a path for a return to long-term growth and prosperity is gaining momentum. We're embarking on a recovery built to last because it will combine the revitalization of our traditional economic strengths in areas like energy, agriculture, and petrochemicals and other resource-based sectors. It's combining those things with increased diversification in fast-growing industries powered by advanced technologies and expansion of our huge undeveloped potential in areas like tourism, aviation, and financial services. This year, we are, on top of all of that, rolling out an infrastructure build, the largest infrastructure build in Alberta history, with $10 billion in projects that are moving Albertans from unemployment to good jobs right now, building roads, bridges, overpasses, water projects, pipelines, gas lines, schools, hospitals, long-term care homes and seniors' homes, and addiction treatment and recovery centers. All of this will spur the creation of an estimated 50,000 jobs and tens of thousands more knock-on jobs with subcontractors and suppliers, small businesses, hotels like this one, and restaurants in every corner of the province. A lot of these projects are happening on First Nations. In late July, for example, I was honored to be at Standoff to announce a $5 million investment to create 75 beds at a new addiction treatment and recovery center on the Big Blood Reserve. In the short term, that project will create some badly needed jobs for the Kenney, but it's also a long-term investment in Alberta's human capital, the single most important element of our future economic growth and success. One of our province's biggest competitive advantages is that we have the youngest population in Canada. And the youngest demographic within our young province is the Indigenous community. Young Indigenous Albertans are increasingly well represented throughout our economy in business, the trades, the professions, in both the private and government sectors. More and more are achieving academic success, seizing opportunities to excel in every field of human endeavor, and building strong families within strong, healthy communities. What we're witnessing here in Alberta, especially in communities like Enoch and several other First Nations that are engaged in the energy sector and other natural resource development on or near their lands, what we are witnessing is the long overdue Indigenous liberation from unemployment and poverty, which must be the moral cause of our time and our generation. It is one of the most exciting social and economic developments of our time, and it points not just to a better future for coming generations of Indigenous people, but to a fairer, a more equitable, and a more united province and a better future for all of us. You see, I believe that the full participation of Indigenous people in our entire economy should be the ultimate goal and achievement of reconciliation, or as Blood Chief Roy Fox calls it, reconciliation. And that is what brings us here today. I am very pleased to announce the first ever investment by Alberta First Nations in a major resource project backed by Alberta's Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. 6 First Nations, the Alexis Nakota Sioux, and great to see you, Chief Tony Alexis, the Enoch Cree, Kahiwan, Whitefish Lake, Ochis, and the Paul First Nations are partnering with OP Trust, one of Canada's biggest pension funds, which manages $22 billion in assets for the Government of Ontario and the Ontario Public Services Employees Union, to invest $93 million in the Cascade Power Project, a $1.5 billion natural gas-fired power plant being built near Edson. This is the first Aboriginal equity investment in an Alberta resource project backstopped by the faith and credit of the Alberta Crown through a loan guarantee issued by the new Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, AIOC. This 900-watt state-of-the-art power plant will meet 8% of Alberta's total electricity needs when it's commissioned. Construction begins immediately, and I know was announced recently, and will be completed by the fall of 2023. The project is expected to create 600 jobs during peak construction, and more than 25 long-term operational jobs, and this is including construction and operational jobs for skilled Indigenous workers employed by First Nations contractors. Natural gas to fuel the plant will come from northwestern Alberta's prolific local gas fields. And this is good news for our natural gas industry, more domestic demand and consumption of that clean energy source. The project accelerates the decarbonization of Alberta's power grid by switching from coal to natural gas on a market basis. Our government is not forcing that. These are market choices being made. A market in which First Nations are now full participants with a seat at the table. And once operational, the power plant is expected to reduce Alberta's carbon emissions from energy production by up to 5%. Between the job creation benefits and all the environmental benefits, plus the safe, reliable, and affordable power benefits for Albertans, there are so many wins here, it's hard to count. But here's the icing on the cake. Revenues for the First Nations investors in the Cascade Power Plant are forecast to total hundreds of millions of dollars over the 30 years of the project. Congratulations to everyone involved in putting together this historic deal. And it was a deal. It wasn't easy, it wasn't straightforward, it took a lot of back and forth. But the chiefs who led this project and the AIOC board and executive worked through this and found a solution that ensures a reasonable level of risk for taxpayers and a reasonable level of equity and cash flow for the First Nations. It's a win-win. I especially want to thank and congratulate Alicia Dubois, who started us off here, for getting the AIOC off to such a great start. Obviously, Alicia's extensive background in Indigenous financial services, she comes to us having run the Indigenous financing program for one of the country's largest banks, and her lifelong commitment to Indigenous economic progress is reflected in the nation-spanning partnership assembled for this project. And let me say, I had a wonderful chance with friends to have dinner with Alicia last night and to learn that she's from Algonquin background, came out here with her family where her dad worked as a tradesman up in the oil sands in Fort McMurray, knows how to drive big trucks, has a post-secondary education in science and law, and is passionate about Indigenous economic development. And we are so fortunate to have a woman of her caliber stepping up to this leadership role, aren't we? Please give her a hand. So I know this is just the beginning. And let me pause to say that it was in March of last year where in this room, together with Grand Chief Morin, I announced the intention of my government in the last election to create an Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation to help facilitate Indigenous co-ownership and financial participation in major resource projects so that Indigenous Albertans could benefit fully from the resource wealth that lies below the ground that their ancestors first inhabited, to help move their people from poverty to prosperity and opportunity and a bright future. And it is so exciting for me to see that dream and that vision being realized in a real, concrete way here today. Today's announcement heralds a new beginning for the Canadian energy and resources industry. These sectors have been held back and pinned down for the last several years by hostile policies constraining the development of new projects and pipelines on behalf of foreign-funded special interests. Typically, those interests claim to be speaking on behalf of Indigenous people, but nothing could be further from the truth. These actions are contrary to the economic interests of Indigenous people in this province. They are reminiscent of the paternalism that haunts our shared history, and they have no place in the 21st century. As former Chief Councillor of the Haisla First Nation, Ellis Ross, says, this is eco-colonialism, and we will not stand for it in Alberta. The chiefs gathered here today, and indeed the vast majority of the First Nations of Alberta and Western Canada, recognize that the economic history and destiny of their people lies in the prudent and responsible stewardship of the natural resources that lie on and below their traditional lands. The crushing impacts of the COVID pandemic and the oil price crash has been devastating for all of us. But I'm glad to see there's good business happening here in the hotel, Billy, and I think that's a good sign for your community. An economic recovery built to last for all of us will inevitably involve the revitalization of Canada's natural resources industry to meet the national and global demand for energy and resource products that are produced under the world's strictest environmental, social, and governance standards. So thanks again to everyone who helped to get us to this historic day, and I look forward to many more exciting announcements about Indigenous economic development through the AIOC in the future, because together we are stronger. Hi, hi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Premier Kenney. I would now like to introduce Minister Wilson.
It's getting hot under that mask. Thank you, Alicia, for your warm welcome, and congratulations on your appointment for CEO for the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. Alberta is so fortunate to have you here, bringing your tremendous skills and expertise to such a vital organization. And I'm confident you'll bring the leadership communities are looking for to build their prosperity. When I was talking to our chairman of the board, Cody Church, is here today, I gave him my wish list for a CEO, and he kind of looked at me like, that's a bit of a stretch. And he calls me up one day and says, Minister, we found her. And I'm so glad. Thank you, Cody. Let's give Cody a big hand, too, and his whole board. Thank you, Elder Laurie, for opening in a good way today. That's so a special prayer. Thank you so much. And Premier Kenney, I appreciate you taking time from your extremely busy schedule for today's announcements, as you always do when it comes to Indigenous prosperity and reconciliation. Thank you, Premier, for being here. It's a special honor. Thank you. To the chiefs attending, Chief Alexis, Chief Morin, Chief Watchmaker, Proxy Chief Stan Uhl, and Chief Beaverbones, thank you, Kinetacore, for all of your work on this. This is a special day. I want to thank you for being here to help us to do this announcement, this milestone announcement with us today. Tansi, everyone. When I first ran for election, my slogan was Kitchiwakan. My adopted grandfather's looking at me like, are you saying this? That's good. So I put Kitchiwakan on my slogan. It means your friend and partner. I had no idea how far it would take me and lead to this momentous day. And it is a momentous day, and thank you all for that. The key word for working together is, I'm going to say this wrong for sure, but memo gomatus, working together. Is it good enough? And this is really working together, and it's been an honor getting to know all of you and working together to pull something like this off. And it's a great day to be here on Treaty 6 territory. And we're gathered here today safely. Everybody's well spaced. I like to have one bison distance between everyone. We're here to recognize the start of an amazing new era. Some of them are big bison. Thanks to Premier Kenney's vision to create a public agency that can back major Indigenous investment in natural resource projects. And who was else here today said this was their idea? A lot of people are claiming this is their idea, but Morin, where are you at? He said that he had met with the Premier, and I think Chief Billy did before the election, and you guys discussed how important it would be if we were to do an investment like this, and now to see it come to fruition and meet our mandate in our platform is awesome. So today's announcement is proof that the start of a true partnership with the full faith and backing of Alberta government's finances. Projects like Cascade, well, it's going to bring jobs and a steady economic stream and the potential of new community programs to lift more people onto solid financial ground, now and for many years to come. And we've seen what happens when communities have the financial means to develop socio-economic programs to meet members' needs. It raises their quality of life. And I've seen it in Whitefish Goodfish Lake First Nation, one of the communities that will benefit from the AOC's backing. Whitefish Goodfish, if you don't know, operates one of North America's largest dry cleaning operations. And recently they've expanded their operation to make these masks. I wear one. Like the one I have with me today. I think they're bringing on an additional 15 people, they told me last night, because they've been picking up extra contracts. So it's just amazing what they're doing up there. And Backwoods Energy, wholly owned and operated by Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation, created an outstanding corporate model. They've recently been selected to support abandoned well cleanup through Alberta government's site rehabilitation program. And with the Premier and Billy and Chief Alexis, we met just behind the casino here a few weeks ago to announce the first well cleanup here. The capacity is there in Indigenous communities, and when more is needed, the AOC can help you. Alberta's recovery depends on Indigenous communities having a real chance at economic prosperity. And this is true reconciliation. Reconciliation makes sure those opportunities are meaningful and enduring. So again, congratulations to Chief Alexis, Chief Beaverbones, Chief Wool, Chief Morin, Chief Rain, and Chief Watchmaker, whose communities are involved in this spectacular project. And to Alicia, thank you so much. And Cody and the rest of your board. I saw some other board members here, Stephen and Peter. Thank you so much for working so hard to pull this together. They kind of built this boat on the fly. I've been putting pressure on them right from the start. So we got to get projects out the door. We got to give people in Alberta hope again. And you all did it. And Matt, thank you so much for all your work on this. And thank you for everybody for joining us in this celebration today. Hi, hi.
Thank you, Minister Wilson. I'd now like to invite Chief Alexis up.
Aboshtit, good morning. Thank you, Elder Laurie McDonald, for getting us started in a good way this morning, acknowledging the Creator for today's blessings and all that we have received so far. I would like to acknowledge Grand Chief Billy Morin, Chiefs present, Elders, Premier Kenney, members of the AIOC, and our partners. The Cascade transaction is a truly historic investment that showcases what can be accomplished when First Nations government and industry work collaboratively for the betterment of all stakeholders. Over the last 8 months, our team and partners have put in an intense effort to reach this deal. All participants should be very proud of the outcome. It is important to note that this commercial transaction is meaningful to Indigenous communities and adds economic value to the overall project. We believe in the Cascade Power Project. It will inject $1.5 billion into the Alberta economy and will provide needed jobs in the local area. The plant is located on a previously cleared forestry site and will provide approximately 8% of Alberta's energy needs. It will use clean burning natural gas and displace coal-fired generation facilities. This will result in reducing CO2 emissions from energy production by up to 5%. This is tangible progress for responsible energy development. A transaction of this magnitude could never happen without the diligent efforts of many people and organizations. I want to acknowledge Premier Kenney's vision for the AIOC. In October of 2019, Premier Kenney stated, "The Alberta government will provide Indigenous peoples a true partner in creating new opportunities so that the First Nations who call this land home can take full advantage of the natural resources that enrich this province." It was from this state sentiment that the AIOC was created. Without this vision and his leadership, this transaction would not have been possible today. Thank you, Premier Kenney. To Alicia Dubois and her team at AIOC. It was a real test being the first AIOC investment. Standards and criteria were set extremely high, and the timeframes were challenging. However, Matt, Chris, and the rest of the team were always collaborative and provided the necessary clarity we sought. To Andrew Plant and his team at Kinetacore, as the developer and operator, Kinetacore recognized the value of Indigenous ownership, which provided the opportunity for us to actively participate in this investment process and supported us through to the end. To Peter Lindley and his team at OP Trust. OP Trust is our investment partner. It is rare that a $22 billion pension fund and a First Nation consortium have the opportunity to form a commercial partnership that will ultimately be beneficial to so many in our communities. Simon and the rest of the working team at OP Trust worked tirelessly to make this deal happen. We could not ask for a better partner and look forward to growing that partnership in years to come. As a token of our appreciation, I would like to present these three pieces of art to the AIOC, Kinetacore, and OP Trust. These three paintings were done by Eugene Alexis, a member from my community. The wood used for these pieces was harvested just west of the Cascade site, and the paintings themselves are depictions of actual locations and cultural activities in the area. Thank you for your partnership. We have learned so much. I look forward to continuing our work together. A special acknowledgement goes out to our CEO, Paul Pacenti, and his team at Backwoods. They literally designed, structured, and negotiated this deal, this complex transaction on behalf of the 6 First Nations. I cannot overstate how grateful I am to have such a high caliber team to trust and rely upon. Indeed, all First Nation participants, the province, and the country owe a debt of gratitude to this team as the principal architects of this historic transaction. Paul, Ryan, Scott, and their team demonstrated incredible financial acumen and clearly understood the realities and nuances of working with and on behalf of multiple First Nation communities. Thank you very much, Paul. To you and your team, Ishnish. To my young brother, Grand Chief Billy Moore, and the Enoch Cree Nation, I could not have asked for a better partner to shepherd this transaction to its successful close. Grand Chief Billy worked passionately on behalf of all the participating nations to help reach this finish line. We are fortunate to have been beneficiaries of his efforts. Every project we have collaborated on and together has been well planned and executed. I thank you, Grand Chief. The investment into this important piece of provincial infrastructure will be transformative to the 6 First Nations involved: Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation, Enoch Cree Nation, Whitefish Goodfish Lake First Nation, Kihiwin Cree Nation, Ochese First Nation, and Paul First Nation. The economic benefits will provide critical and tangible income for future generations. Thank you. To you and your nations and to your teams for your trust in the spirit of partnership. The Cascade investment represents an important step forward and is a truly significant transaction from so many different perspectives. It is my great hope that what we have accomplished becomes a national blueprint for how major energy projects like the Trans Mountain Pipeline and other infrastructure projects can be structured and financed on commercial terms to include Indigenous peoples. We are certainly willing and ready to share our experience to assist and advance the case for Indigenous asset ownership. On behalf of my council, my people, and my elders, we have so many here, I want to thank you all very much. Ishnish. I would like to now introduce Andrew Plant, CEO of Kinetacore, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Chief Tony. Thank you for the amazing gift, and thank you for having me here today. I'm Andrew Plant, the President and CEO of Kinetacore. Kinetacore is the developer and asset manager of the 900 megawatt Cascade Power Project. We are responsible for the safe and environmentally focused development, construction, and ongoing operations of Cascade on behalf of our investors, the McLeod River Power Group, which is the partnership between OP Trust and the Indigenous Communities Syndicate Limited Partnership, known as the ICS, Axiom Infrastructure, and DIF Capital Partners. On behalf of OP Trust, who pass along their sincere regrets for missing today due to COVID-related travel restrictions, they have asked me to express their gratitude to the Backwoods, the AIOC, and our 6 new First Nations partners at the ICS for all of their hard work and dedication, which has resulted in this great partnership. OP Trust is proud to be investing in Alberta infrastructure and entering into a long-term partnership with multiple First Nations that we hope could be a model for future projects between First Nations and industry. As the developer, we at Kinetacore have been focused on developing a power plant that would not only support Alberta's goal of transitioning off coal-fired generation by the end of the decade, but also provide meaningful social and environmental benefits to stakeholders. We are truly fortunate to have had the opportunity to work together with everyone here to create an investment that is mutually beneficial to both the First Nations and the other infrastructure investors at Cascade. When Kinetacore looks for investment partners on projects, we always focus on alignment of interests. With the local knowledge and the long-term views of the ICS, we have been fortunate to find a partner that is aligned and will provide Cascade a local advantage that will benefit all stakeholders over the life of the project. Through ICS's involvement, Cascade will receive numerous benefits through collaboration and the deep understanding of local priorities that are required to make Cascade a success. This partnership was a result of mutual understanding of the positive benefits that all parties could achieve with Indigenous ownership. And all of this wouldn't have been possible without the Premier and the Alberta government for having the vision to establish the AIOC, for which we are very appreciative. The AIOC provides a structure that allows groups such as the ICS to access capital and invest in commercially viable projects that will provide direct benefits to First Nations and industry in the province. The ability for groups such as the ICS to have a clear path to equity ownership creates a structure that truly benefits all parties involved. We feel very fortunate to have been able to make it through the rigorous diligence of the AIOC, which has allowed for this ICS participation in Cascade. Our team at Kinetacore is extremely humbled to have participated in this historic transaction. Cascade represents a significant infrastructure investment in Alberta with a capital cost of just over $1.5 billion and over 3 million work hours required for construction, all of which wouldn't have been possible without everybody here. We truly appreciate the opportunity and trust that we have been given by our new First Nations partners at the ICS, the AIOC, and the Government of Alberta as we look forward to a long and mutually beneficial partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd now like to invite Grand Chief Billy Morin.
Just waiting for my second round of applause from that room here. Just hold on. No, I'm just joking. It's a good day. It's a good day to laugh. It's a good day to smile. It's a historic day to come together and shake hands and do something again historic. Nuwako magantik katam statinawa gakyo huape kyo nasigas and egwa nahtoki topi amaskesi ochinia. You know, for me, coming up here, last but not least, I'm also the Grand Chief at Treaty 6, and to me, this story started 144 years ago with the signing of Treaty. Treaty 6 spans from the Manitoba-Saskatchewan border to the Rocky Mountains, and it does so between the Saskatchewan rivers in the south to the Athabasca rivers in the north. And ultimately, what our ancestors did was they established a corridor of territory and sharing with the newfound Canadian partners that they had in the spirit and intent of treaty of working together. And 144 years later, this corridor is finally doing some really special things in that spirit and intent of working together. In this corridor, we have 144 years ago, a rail line go through, roughly about that time. And then maybe decades later, you had a highway go through. And maybe a few decades later, you had a few pipelines go through, namely TMX. And you have that TMX going through again. Here in Alberta, in this corridor, specifically for the Cascade Project, you have transmission and energy and gas development to supply thousands of homes in Alberta with heat and power, to supply thousands of businesses and ultimately jobs with heat and power. Our ancestors knew this was a sacred place. This was a very special corridor of land. And with this deal today, really unprecedented things have happened with Indigenous partnership. The government of Alberta through AIOC, Kinetacore, OP Trust, and all of our friends and relations, Nuwako Magantik, our legal teams who are here today as well, to really do something to honor again what we started 144 years ago. So that's what I'm really, really proud about. And you can only imagine what this corridor is going to look like in the generations to come with the precedent that we've set today of actually Indigenous ownership and partnership in a project like this. It's already been said how much we need each other in this. When the Premier was here a little over a year ago announcing this project, again, I commend the government of Alberta for moving at the speed of business. 11 months, and we spoke about it last night, to have a new government come in, to have OP Trust come in, to have the AIOC established and the board, to go get a new CEO, to bring 6, 7 chiefs together, to have multiple legal teams come together, to have multiple consultants come together, to have elders come together, to have community members come together, to have Albertans, First Nations, and Canadians come together is no small task. But we established that road, we did the work, and you could just, again, only imagine the blueprint and the template that has been set on what's possible for the future. So thank you again for coming and having this inauguration. Chief Alexis, and our chiefs and our leaders here from the other First Nations. And I imagine this chair is for Chief Rain. He's going through some difficult times in his nation right now, but you know, today's a day for hope, and we certainly will reach out to him and again maybe reinvigorate that hope in his community to do the right thing. Because ultimately, this is not about just revenue and business. This is about that reinvestment into community that even the Premier talked about. Today, maybe it's just a power plant, but that power plant's going to transition into homes, into heat, into energy. It's going to transition to jobs. It's going to transition into social programs. So, hi, Kinetacore, Kumtanawao. Very thankful to be here today. Hi.
Thank you, Grand Chief. So I've been asked to make closing remarks, and I have to say, after those final remarks from Grand Chief, there's really nothing more to say other than thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, everybody, for showing up in the most meaningful of ways. This is a very momentous historical moment. It's the one of many that are still to come. I look forward to seeing many of you many more times. Thank you.
Okay, folks, this wraps up the formal remarks, and we're now going to be taking a media Q&A. Operator, can you please put through our first caller?
All right, the first question is from Chris Varco with the Calgary Herald. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, I've got a couple of questions. The first one, though, is for Alicia Dubois. Can you explain to me why was this project the first one to go ahead? What kind of blueprint in your mind does it provide for future projects? And what other areas in natural resource development are you looking to move ahead with in the next year or so? And separately for the Premier, I'm wondering whether you think that the financial stress that the province is facing right now is going to impact at all the loan guarantees or the funding that will be available for the Indigenous Opportunities Corporation.
I'm going to try my very best to start at the top there. So this deal came to the AIOC through Alexis and also Enoch. It was really something that they wanted to see through. They invited other participants, much to our pleasure. The 4 other nations joined. The consortium is a very important component of what it is we're doing here. It means the reach of the project, the engagement of the project is just that much more meaningful. And I think I answered a couple of questions, but I'm sorry if I missed one. Can you remind me?
This meaning for other projects, and what other developments or projects you're looking at this year in terms of what other industries or areas?
Yeah, so we have a lineup of applications that we are reviewing. We do focus on the natural resource sector and related infrastructure, so they all fall within that bucket. As a blueprint, I mean, again, we'll speak to the consortium and how valuable that is in our mind. But at the end of the day, what we're really looking to achieve is to support commercially viable deals. So very strong risk parameters are applied to these deals. These are not dollars out the door. It's a guarantee from the government, but the guarantee is always established with the aim that the project itself is viable and that it will mean success for the communities, for all of the proponents, and the province. Sure. And here's Premier.
Thanks, Chris. And I would say that, look, this is $1 billion credit backstop, backstop by the Alberta Crown, and so constitutes a liability, a potential liability for the Crown. But we think it's a necessary step forward. As I've said before, we're not going to get out of the fiscal crisis that Alberta is in without economic growth. And we will get economic growth through projects like this, projects that will create employment and revenues for the government in the long term. Secondly, it is a critical imperative for Alberta that we see First Nations playing a real leadership role with an equity stake in resource projects if there's going to be a vital future for our resource industries. So this is, and thirdly, I would point out that the AIOC is, as Alicia just said, applying a very rigorous screen to proposals. They've received, I think, dozens of proposals, and I think I've been briefed. It's fair to say that not all of them were well developed, and some of them, many of them, far exceeded the risk profile of the AIOC. So I suspect the majority of projects that are proposed will not get a green light from the AIOC, and I do understand that they're well advanced in looking at a couple of other prospective major investments. As you know, Chris, the mandate for AIOC is limited to resource projects, and the board can define how that is applied. They have been approached by First Nations to backstop other kinds of projects like innovative agricultural projects, irrigation projects, and things like that. And so if the board sees a really meritorious project that's outside of its mandate, they can come to the government to seek an exemption to broaden the mandate. But we did want to focus in the first period of the AIOC on resource projects for obvious reasons. And finally, let me say that if the AIOC is a success, if they commit the first $1 billion in backstop to creditworthy projects that are creating jobs and opportunity for First Nations, the Government of Alberta will consider expanding the availability of credit backstop and indeed expanding the mandate.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder to folks on the line to please try and keep yourselves to one question, as I want to get through as many folks as possible today. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Rafi Puchakanian with CBC. Go ahead, Rafi.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. It's for the Premier, and it's not related to today's subject. Premier, this morning you received a letter from 600 Albertan patients, parents, families, and physicians who are asking you to reconsider defunding the pilot project that was funding 2 different medicated drug addiction clinics in Calgary and Edmonton. So I guess my question is, why is the government defunding these, and what kind of replacement programs would you see taking their place?
Well, I haven't seen the letter, first of all. Secondly, decisions have not been made with respect to defunding, except for the Lethbridge Centre, following the audit which demonstrated widespread financial malfeasance, including, I believe, $1.6 million that had gone missing, a small nonprofit that was employing over 120 people, a executive that was making something like $350,000 a year, taking European trips, and providing financial benefits to close friends. That was clearly a gross financial malfeasance, as underscored by the accounting firm that did that. And, you know, we're not going to fund operations that are there to frankly exploit the misery of people addicted to drugs in order to profit themselves. That's outrageous. It should be condemned. And that's why our government withdrew funding. As we said, there will be a seamless transition to other services. Our government's focus is on a holistic approach that includes an appropriate space for harm reduction, but significantly expands access to treatment and recovery services, from detox to long-term treatment centers in therapeutic communities to lifetime recovery programs. That's why, for example, we announced the new treatment center for long-term care for people addicted to drugs at the Kenney First Nation, as well as one in Lethbridge County for other people in southern Alberta. We've done the same in Red Deer. We're expanding those services right across the province. We're also expanding access to alternative drug treatment courts. But listen, Albertans know that facilitating addiction, as the federal government now wants to do by handing out free narcotics to addicts, is not compassion. We need a compassionate approach, offers people stuck in the trap of destructive addictions a path out, a way out, and that's why our focus is on treatment and recovery.
Okay, thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Lauren Krugel with the Canadian Press. ahead, Lauren.
Good afternoon, and this is also not related to the announcement today. Apologies. We heard yesterday that BC is taking a number of steps to limit the spread of COVID-19 in places like bars, restaurants, lounges, such as volume limits, closing alcohol sales earlier than normal. Alberta has more hospitalizations and more active cases than BC does, and I'm just wondering whether Alberta would consider taking similar steps to BC when it comes to how those venues operate.
So, first of all, my apologies to everybody here. You can expect a lot of off-topic questions. Today's announcement was good news, which for much of the media means no news. I apologize for that. The answer to your question is actually, I saw the latest stats yesterday, and BC was basically tied with Alberta in terms of per capita new cases and hospitalizations, ICU admissions. Let's be clear. Based on yesterday's data, we have about 45 people in hospital in Alberta with COVID-19, about 10 in ICUs out of that 45. That is in a province of 4.4 million people. I want to commend Albertans for the tremendous personal responsibility that they've demonstrated through the past 6 months and the real patience and discipline that they've exhibited. I'm proud to say that Alberta has had the least restrictive public health measures in North America, I think with the exception of South Dakota. And yet through most of the last 6 months, we've had amongst the lowest levels of infection hospitalizations and COVID fatalities of the large population Canadian provinces and the U.S. states as well as Europe. So we've done very well. We should be concerned about the recent increase in the total number of active cases. But ultimately, Alberta's belief is we're not going to micromanage our way out of this. We're only going to get through this if people exercise personal responsibility. And that's what we call on Albertans to do. We think based on the advice of our Chief Medical Officer, currently have the right set of public health measures in place. And one thing I said to the legislature back in May was that we want to do everything we possibly can to avoid jerking around people indiscriminately shutting down their businesses, their jobs, and their livelihoods. We have to be focused on the imperative not just of saving lives, but also saving livelihoods, because the ultimate downstream consequences of constantly shutting down businesses and laying people off will be depression, potentially addiction, huge family challenges, pushing people into poverty, and that is unacceptable. So we have to find the right balance. I think generally Alberta has done a very good job, but that of course we'll take on board any future advice from the Chief Medical Officer of Health. But at this point, I think Alberta has done a very good job of preventing the spread. And let me finally remind you again of what I said to the legislature in May, that the average age of COVID-19 related fatalities in Alberta is 84. The average life expectancy in the province is 83. And the vast majority of those who we've lost to COVID-19 were not only at the average age of 84, but they had one or more chronic health conditions or comorbidities. And so the real challenge for us is to protect the most vulnerable, particularly seniors in congregate living facilities.
Okay, thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Kelly Kreiderman with the Globe and Mail. Go ahead, Kelly.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my question. Premier, you talked about this not being an easy deal. You said it wasn't straightforward. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that on the news for today. Also, following up on Lauren's question, will you be looking at any moves to prioritize keeping school children in school in terms of keeping things going as Ontario and BC have done?
Could you repeat the second part there, Kelly? I didn't quite understand that. Keeping children in school.
Just following up on Lauren's question. Ontario and BC, as students go back to school, are making some decisions in terms of reopening of the economy to prioritize the return to school, and I'm wondering if that is a consideration for the Alberta government.
Yeah, perhaps it's the audio here. I'm still not entirely clear on that second part of the question. Let me say that we are following the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health and extensive consultations with school superintendents in the protocols for the safe reopening of schools. and we have given great flexibility to school boards and local school principals to adapt according to their own local circumstances and needs. When infections are confirmed at individual schools, the school administrators and their school boards immediately work with Alberta Health Services and the Office of the Chief Medical Officer to respond appropriately. There are about 750,000 students from K to 12 in Alberta in 2,400 schools, and we are confident that the vast majority, that these schools can continue to operate safely. When there are individual outbreaks, there will be an appropriate response. And that's broadly the case right across the country. I've heard criticism here about the reopening of the schools from unions and others, but I've heard exactly the same criticism being directed at every provincial government across the country. And so we'll continue to follow the advice of our Chief Medical Officer with respect to the operation of the schools. And on the question of the difficult path to coming to this final agreement, maybe I'll refer that to Alicia or somebody from her staff, because I probably shouldn't interfere in their business. Or Paul?
I'm just going to ask Paul to come up from Backwoods so he can give you details on the deal.
There was a couple of factors that added to the complexity. One was just the number of participants. On the ICS side, we had 6 First Nations all trying to get aligned. There was 3 major investment groups with DIF and Axiom and OP Trust. And then there was the AIOC, which had really challenging criteria in terms of risk mitigation. So there was lots of iterations in trying to really thread the needle to get the risk profile right and to make sure that all the equity investors and the ICS were all aligned. Oh, I'm Paul Pacenti from Backwoods Energy Services, an Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation company, and we designed and structured the transaction on behalf of the ICS.
Perfect. We have time for about 3 more questions. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
All right, next is Kieran Bixby from Rebel News. Go ahead, Kieran.
Hi, it's Kieran Bixby with Rebel News here. I'll try and put the busting up of the Alberta Press Gallery's monopoly on journalistic access to good use and actually ask an on-topic question. There's millions of dollars being spent every year by out-of-province and especially out-of-country activists to brand Indigenous people like they're opposed to natural gas, oil sands development, pipelines, etc. Premier, in your experience negotiating this deal, is that the experience that you had with Indigenous populations?
No, in fact, in June of last year, our government convened a Crown First Nations Leadership Summit where we invited, I think, 46 of Alberta's Indigenous chiefs to meet with our cabinet for the better part of a day. And the central agenda item was partnerships in responsible resource development. And I was very happy to see basically unanimity around the table. Obviously, First Nations have a special connection to the land of their ancestors, and are more sensitive than most people about environmental conservation and preservation. At the same time, they understand the First Nations with whom we have engaged through this agreement and in all of our consultations over the past 16 months. I've heard a deep understanding about the need to help move people from poverty to opportunity through responsible resource development partnerships. Let me give you a solid proof point about this. The Supreme Court of Canada recently confirmed in its judgment on the Trans Mountain Pipeline that 111 of the 118 First Nations with some proximity to the Trans Mountain Pipeline actually support the expansion project or are not opposed to it. And I think 57 of those nations have signed benefit agreements. And we're down to, I think, only 3 or 4 of those 118 First Nations who are opposed. I find it very curious that whenever I see a story on the CBC or various other media, I get the impression that the vast majority of First Nations are opposed to that project, when the exact opposite is true, and that truth has been validated by both the Federal Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada. So I hope that from developments such as this one today, that some in the media will begin to give a larger voice share to First Nations who want to be partners in prosperity. And I'll give you, that's also why we've established the Indigenous Legal Defense Fund, which is now supporting a challenge by which First Nation? It'll come to the minister in a second. Oh, Lubicon. Yeah, by the Lubicon First Nation to challenge the constitutionality of the Federal Bill C-48. I would point out, that was the tanker ban. I would point out on that one, for example, that the Nisga'a First Nation on the west coast of BC, they have a very advanced self-government arrangement and they want economic development. They want the potential to be able to develop ports for export of products, including energy products, off the Canadian west coast. And they're saying, why are we being inhibited by the federal government in doing so through Bill C-48, as is the Lubicon Nation here in Alberta. So we'll continue to work with, to give an equal voice share and a greater legal standing to those First Nations who want to balance environmental protection with responsible development.
Perfect, thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Kevin Nimick with CTV. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hi there, another question for the Premier, again, unrelated to today's press conference, but Grey Eagle Casino in Calgary is announcing today that they're relaunching table games. How much revenue has been lost for the province through casinos during the pandemic so far, and how important is that revenue to get back on track?
Well, it's an important revenue source through the AGLC to receive gaming revenues. I would say that the table games are a relatively small portion of revenues from gaming. The significant majority of those revenues come from VLTs or slot machines, and we opened those back in, when, Billy? June. Back in June. And I can tell you that, you know, for a lot of our First Nations, some of their biggest economic drivers and job creators are the casinos. And as you know, Alberta has a very good system of sharing gaming revenues with the First Nations that host casinos with those First Nations that don't. And so all First Nations in Alberta benefit from this, and we have heard from the First Nations and other owners of gaming operations about the need to get back to work, to employ people. And the Chief Medical Officer for Health and her staff have looked very closely and worked with the operators to come up with safe guidelines. And my understanding is the advice, the research that the CMO office did, the Chief Medical Officer's office did, indicates that there's little or no evidence of spread through card games if they are done in a safe way. So, Chief Billy, would you like to add anything to that? His nation operates one of the largest casinos in the province right here.
So the importance as well is not just to the 6 hosts or the host First Nations. A lot of that money goes back to the non-hosts that we're currently even sitting with here in the room today. So that's tens of millions of dollars in losses, economic revenue, and this is not just about, again, straight for profit. This is a model under the AGLC that goes back into charities. So even for the non-Indigenous casinos, their piece that go back to sports for youth, that go back to non-for-profits in the city, they're also benefiting from these tables opening up. So it's a ray of hope at this time for non-for-profit charities under the AGLC model, and that's really the importance of opening up tables sooner rather than later, and glad to hear Sutina's doing it, and hats off to our team here at River Cree who's been really proactive in getting it done.
Perfect. And just before we take the last caller, a reminder to our gathered dignitaries to gather in front of the stage after the media portion wraps up for a quick photo. And with that, operator, can you please put through our final call?
Yes, final question is Adrian Williams with CBC Francais. Go ahead, Adrian.
Bonjour, ma question est pour... en fait, j'aurais deux questions pour le premier ministre, Edson Kenney. Premièrement, si vous pouviez peut-être nous faire une petite déclaration en français concernant l'importance pour la province de ce projet, de cette nouvelle centrale électrique. Et puis, j'aurais une question aussi sur le changement de nom de deux écoles à Edmonton. J'aimerais savoir ce que vous pensez des deux politiciens.
Okay. C'est Mr. Oliver? Et qui est l'autre? C'est Mr.
Oui,
Oliver?
exactement. Oui, un instant.
Okay.
C'est Frank Oliver et Dan Knott.
Okay.
Trouvez-vous que ces politiciens sont inspirants?
Sur la deuxième question, premier, écoutez, c'est une décision des communautés locales. Je respecte leurs décisions. De temps en temps, il y aura un changement des noms pour les raisons particulières et je respecte tout ça. Mais sur la première question, c'est une annonce importante d'investissement de près de 100 millions de dollars par les nations, les Premières Nations, les Autochtones en Alberta, dans la construction d'un plan d'énergie pour l'électricité. L'électricité, c'est une annonce qui confirme la vision de la coopération des opportunités pour le peuple autochtone qui a été créé par l'Alberta avec un investissement d'1 milliard de dollars. La raison pour ça est pour aider les Premières Nations d'aller trop souvent la pauvreté parmi leur peuple à la prospérité et l'opportunité économique. Pas seulement avec les petits contrats ici et là-bas, mais avec, comme propriétaire des actions, vraiment avec une place à la table économique où les décisions sont prises. C'est vraiment historique pour cette raison-là. Et c'est une bonne épreuve de collaboration entre plusieurs Premières Nations, le gouvernement de l'Alberta et le secteur privé. Et je suis très ravi à voir ce progrès ici et j'ai hâte à voir les annonces de progrès économique pour les Premières Nations à venir dans le futur.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everyone for your patience. Thank you very much.